Dave Sammons. I'm the minister of this church and the chair of the Clergy for Responsible Choices. And we want you to be very clear that there are clergy in this community who care very deeply about providing responsible sex education to our children, not only in our congregations but in our public schools. And as a parent of 5 children who have gone through schools in this community, I'm particularly concerned about this myself. So we want to welcome you here tonight to a program which will tell you a bit about what is going on in our community and how people in this community are responding to it.
We want to empower community members. We want to provide them with the tools so that they can advocate for those for that in their schools. We recognize that it's a big task. It's going to take a lot of work.
Good evening. My name is Renee Walker, and I am a parent in the Mount Diablo Unified School District. And I came here tonight to talk with you about the issue of sexuality education and how I became involved in it. What's really kind of amazing is that the biggest issue I can really recall besides this that I ever spoke to a group of people about was probably the fact that I hadn't purchased enough donuts for our swim team. So this is really kind of an amazing thing for me personally.
Renee Walker's involvement began when her son brought home a parent permission slip for a family life program at school.
It said that they would drive home the message of abstinence through the use of computerized dolls. And but what bothered me on the permission slip was that the wording said abstinence until marriage. The reason that that bothered me was its inherent disregard for non-heterosexual youth. I didn't pay much attention to it because I just really didn't believe that our school would knowingly exclude kids from the program based on sexual orientation. So I really thought it was just a poor choice of words, sort of a typo or something on that, really inadvertent. I signed the permission slip and he went ahead and participated in the program.
Then about a week into the program, my family and I were out to dinner, and my son was looking down at his dinner plate and fiddling around with something, and I asked him what it was, and he said, well, it's the wet paper from my straw, but it reminds me of the seaweed that they insert into a woman's cervix before she has an abortion. And I went home after that dinner and I was curious. It really piqued my curiosity, and so I started thumbing through his family life notebook, and I came across a page where at the top, across the top, was written the word abortion, and it was a T-chart, and on both sides on either side of the paper there was a list of advantages and disadvantages to abortion. And under the advantages column, he had written several things and had crossed them out. And under the disadvantages column, he had written the words killing a child and had circled them. So it kind of popped right off the page at me, and I asked him why he wrote that. And he looked up at me very, very matter-of-factly and said, because it tears the arms and legs off. I took a deep breath and I turned the paper over, and I noticed on the backside he had written a very extensive and detailed notes on various abortion procedures, a lot of medical terminology.
To this day, I'm not so concerned about him having an opinion one way or other on the issue of abortion. And in fact, my husband and I really want our kids to explore both sides of the pro-life debate. What was most concerning to me was that he had come to such a staunch resolve on an issue that he was so completely unconscious about.
So all of this information really alarmed me, and it alarmed me for a couple of reasons. One, it seemed that what he was being taught about abortion was very one-sided and biased. And the second reason that I was feeling very concerned and very alarmed was the fact that what I had been told about the program and what he had learned seemed like two entirely different things.
It was at this point that Walker decided to do some research into the organization behind the program, a group called First Resort.
I found out that First Resort was, and it still is, a crisis pregnancy center that counsels women about their unintended pregnancies, and that the sex education presenters didn't provide time to educate students about birth control, and instead they provided a handout that contained inaccuracies about birth control. They also provided students as young as 10 with very frightening material about abortion and sexually transmitted infection. I also discovered that Kaiser Permanente had stopped referring patients to First Resort for pregnancy counseling. Their reason was they felt First Resort had deceived them about who they were and what they were telling patients. Kaiser took action after learning that First Resort's founder had said that God had told every woman that abortion was never the right answer.
But the local school district in this Northern California community was still using First Resort to educate young people about family and sexuality. And it was their approach to sexuality education that triggered an extraordinary odyssey for Renee Walker, a Northern California mom who was about to go from interested parent to community activist and get a crash course in American sexual attitudes along the way.
I do think we are actually witnessing an extreme kind of puritanical attitude towards sex and less receptivity to discussion of sex education, condoms, this whole abstinence movement that's taking place in parts of the country, promoting sexual abstinence among young people.
There's a great religious background to sexuality and about sexuality in this country. And I think with that backdrop, there's been a lot of fear and a lot of intrigue, both at the same time, about sexuality.
American culture is conflicted about sexuality, but it's also that some people want to repress sexuality, and they're fighting with people who want to express it.
That conflict plays itself out in a number of ways. It often shows up as a disconnect between what people say, for example, about infidelity, and what they actually do. In fact, many more Americans engage in this sort of practice than their stated attitudes would suggest. Conflicting views about sexuality are also evident in how Americans perceive sexually explicit materials. While many see them as dangerous threats that should be illegal, others believe it's wrong for government to restrict public access.
The first X-rated film was made 6 months after the motion picture camera was invented. When we look at it legally, the question is obscenity. The people who want to see sexual material as positive label it erotica or adult erotic material. The people who want to see it as negative label it as pornography. And the number of titles that are made yearly is somewhere between 8,000 and 10,000 new titles a year. Now that's a tremendously large consumption of what we would label as X-rated material. And it also has moved from the back room, from the men's bars, into the Marriott, the Hilton, and every major hotel in the country.